For most of my life, I believed in loyalty, in love, in the unshakable foundation of family. I thought that if you gave yourself fully, to a relationship, a commitment, a duty, it would mean something. It would last. But life has a cruel way of teaching you otherwise. Trust is fragile. Love can be a lie. And sometimes, the people you cherish the most are the ones who betray you in ways you never see coming. I spent years married to a man I thought was mine. Raising a son I thought was ours. Living a life I thought was real. But none of it was. Not in the way I believed. It all unraveled on an ordinary evening, one that should have been like any other. Leo had just returned from deployment. He was tired, adjusting, trying to slip back into the rhythm of home. But something felt off. I saw it in his eyes, the way they searched, questioned, as if looking for an answer he hadn't yet put into words. Then it happened. I was at the kitchen table folding laundry when I saw him flipping through a stack of old papers. Just routine documents, nothing out of place. Until he stopped. His fingers hovered over a single sheet. And in an instant, I saw it. The way his face changed. The warmth in his eyes turned cold. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. "What's this?" I turned, my heart pounding. A hospital bill. I had buried it deep, tucked it away like a ghost of a past I had desperately tried to forget. But now it was in his hands. And in that moment, I knew, everything was about to come crashing down. "Leo, He cut me off, his eyes scanning the page with terrifying focus. Then they flicked back to me, sharp and unforgiving. "My brother's name is on here," he said, voice trembling. "Not mine." Silence. The kind that stretches, suffocates. The kind that drowns you before you can even gasp for air. "Tell me it's a mistake," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." I wanted to. I wanted to lie, to spin some excuse, to rewrite history so that it wouldn't hurt him the way I knew it would. But I couldn't. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal. Tears blurred my vision as I opened my mouth, but no words came. How could I explain? How could I make him understand something so unforgivable? The paper hit the table with a sharp slap, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. "How long?" he whispered, but the weight of his words crushed me. I wiped my tears, my hands shaking. I choked. "It was a mistake, Leo." His bitter laughter sent a shiver down my spine. A mistake. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake is burning dinner. He gestured wildly at the paper, at the truth lying between us. "This is a betrayal." "I was lonely," I sobbed. "You were gone for so long, and I don't." His voice was raw, shredded. "Don't you dare try to justify this." His whole body tensed, fists clenched at his sides, as if he was holding himself back. From breaking something. From breaking me. "I love you," I whispered, desperate. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "No. If you did, you wouldn't have done this." Then came the moment that shattered everything. "He doesn't know," I admitted in a broken whisper. "He thinks you're his father." Leo stilled. His gaze flickered toward the hallway, where our son, no, his nephew, was playing. Oblivious. Innocent. A child born into a lie neither of us had the courage to confess. I saw the war inside him. The love he had for our son. The hatred he had for me. The betrayal too vast to comprehend. And then, he turned. Walked out. No words. No goodbye. Just gone. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. Leo never came back. Never called. Never sent a message. It was as if he had erased me, erased us. The divorce papers arrived in the mail, unsigned by love, unstained by anger. Just cold. Final. And then, as if the universe hadn't punished me enough, the final blow came. A phone call. A voice telling me what no one ever expects to hear. There's been an accident. The world blurred. My legs gave out. The next thing I knew, I was staring at a hospital bed. At the stillness of the man I had loved and betrayed. The man who had once been my whole world, now lying lifeless beneath sterile white sheets. Leo was gone. And with him, so was any chance of forgiveness. Then came the second betrayal. You've turned him against us, my mother's voice hissed through the phone. I scoffed, gripping it tighter. Turned him against you. No. I gave him the truth. Something you and Dad never had the decency to do. That wasn't your truth to tell, my father snapped. No right. I shot back, my voice rising. No right to tell him the reality of his own life. To tell him what his father did. He deserved to know, whether you liked it or not. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then my mother's voice, quiet. Pleading. He's furious with your brother. He won't even speak to him. He packed a bag and left. I exhaled, rubbing my face. I should have expected this. My nephew, no, Leo's son, wasn't the kind of person to sit with the weight of a lie. Not once he knew the truth. Where is he? I asked. We don't know, she admitted, her voice shaking. He won't answer our calls. His fiancée said he's staying with a friend, but she won't tell us where. I closed my eyes. I could picture him, his hands clenched, his jaw tight, trying to piece together a life that suddenly felt like a lie. I had been there once. I knew the feeling all too well. You have to fix this, my mother begged. Talk to him. Tell him that none of this changes who his father was. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, but it does, Mom. It changes everything. I'm not fixing anything, I said, my voice firm. You and Dad chose to protect my brother. You let him live without consequences. Now, he has to deal with them. You can't just. Goodbye, Mom. I ended the call before she could say another word. Days passed, and I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. My nephew had to sort through his emotions on his own. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. So when a knock sounded at my door late one evening, I wasn't surprised to see him standing there, his face weary, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I stepped aside without a word, letting him in. He walked past me, stopping in the middle of the living room as if suddenly unsure where he belonged. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, handed it to him, and sat down on the couch. Take your time. He exhaled a shaky breath and sat across from me, rubbing a hand over his face. My dad, he started, hesitation thick in his voice. I nodded, waiting. He denied it at first, he continued. Told me you were twisting things, trying to make him look bad. But then I showed him the proof, the papers, the dates. He had nothing to say. I could only imagine the moment realization hit. My brother backed into a corner he couldn't escape. He tried to justify it, my nephew said bitterly. Said it was a mistake, that he and Mom never meant to hurt anyone. That it was complicated. He scoffed. But it wasn't complicated, was it? He betrayed you. He lied to me. And Mom, she let it happen. I let out a slow breath. No, it wasn't complicated. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. I can't even look at him. I packed my bags and left. My fiancé doesn't understand. My grandparents are furious. And now I don't even know who I am anymore. His voice cracked at the last part, and my chest tightened. You're still you, I said gently. This doesn't change that. He shook his head. It changes everything. My whole childhood, every memory I have of him, it's all tainted now. And my wedding. He swallowed hard. How am I supposed to stand up there with him by my side, knowing what I know? I studied him carefully. Do you want him there? He let out a long, unsteady breath. No. Then don't invite him. He looked at me sharply. It's not that easy. Sure it is, I said, leaning forward. This is your life. You get to decide who stands beside you. A bitter laugh escaped him. And what about the rest of the family? They'll never forgive me if I cut him out. I shrugged. Then let them be angry. They chose him over the truth. If they can't accept your decision, that's on them, not you. He stared at me for a long time, his mind racing. I could see the war within him. The part of him that still wanted to believe in his father, still wanted to hold on to the life he knew, fighting against the undeniable truth. "How did you do it?" he asked finally. "Do what?" "Walk away." I let out a slow breath. Because I had to. Because every time I looked at them, all I saw was betrayal. And I couldn't live with that. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Then, after a long pause, he asked the one question I hadn't been prepared for. "Do you regret it?" I hesitated. Did I? For years, I had convinced myself that cutting them off was the only way to survive. But now, watching him struggle with the same pain, I wasn't so sure anymore. "Some days," I admitted. "But not enough to go back." His expression darkened. "Then I guess I have a choice to make." He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room before turning back to me. "If I uninvite my dad, if I go through with this, will you come?" His voice was small, hopeful. For years, I had told myself I had nothing left to give, that there was nothing tying me to that part of my life anymore. But looking at him now, I realized that wasn't entirely true. "I'll be there," I said. His shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you." He left shortly after that, still weighed down by the decision he had to make. I didn't try to sway him one way or another. This was his burden to carry now. But as I watched him drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, I had made the right choice, even if it had taken me years to get here. The day of the wedding arrived, but the tension leading up to it was unbearable. My nephew had made his decision. His father was not invited. The fallout sent ripples through the family. My mother had called me 3 times in the last 48 hours, each time more desperate than the last. "You don't understand what you're doing to this family," she had pleaded. But she was wrong. I understood perfectly. I arrived early, dressed in a dark suit, watching as guests took their seats. My nephew stood near the altar, composed but tense. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. When I approached, he turned to me with an exhausted smile. "You came. I told you I would." He nodded, exhaling heavily. I keep expecting him to show up anyway. To barge in and make a scene. "He won't," I assured him. "Not this time." But the truth was, I wasn't sure. My brother had never been one to accept consequences. The music started, and we fell into silence. The ceremony was beautiful, his fiancée radiant, the vows heartfelt. But I could see it in his eyes, the shadow of absence, the weight of betrayal. Still, he stood tall. He got through it. At the reception, the whispers followed him everywhere. Some guests knew the truth. Some only suspected. But all had questions. My mother and father sat stiffly in a corner, their disappointment palpable. I wasn't sure why they had come if they didn't support his choice. Maybe they still thought they could change his mind. Then, near the end of the night, my brother arrived. I saw him before my nephew did, standing at the entrance, his face unreadable. The air shifted. A few guests noticed, their murmurs rising. My nephew froze when he turned and saw him. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my brother took a step forward. "Son." It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was an expectation. A demand to be acknowledged. My nephew straightened, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here." "I just wanted to talk," my brother said, his voice calm, measured. "This is your wedding day. I should be part of it." My nephew didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to me. And for the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. Resolve. "You were right," he said softly. Then he turned back to my brother. "You need to leave." My brother's eyes flickered, shock, maybe even pain. But he didn't argue. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. And just like that, the weight lifted. My nephew let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Then he looked at me. "Thank you." I nodded. "You did this on your own." "Maybe," he admitted. "But I wouldn't have had the courage if you hadn't told me the truth." I placed a hand on his shoulder. That's what family is supposed to do. And for the first time in years, I felt like I finally had one again.